This story is titled, I Found Out My Mother is Having an Affair on My Father, and Both My Sisters Helped Cover It Up. Hey everyone! Before we jump into today's video, I need your help. We've noticed the channel is losing some traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can support us. It's quick, free, and it helps us keep bringing you awesome content. Your support means the world. Let's keep this channel growing together. Thanks so much. Now let's start the video. Hi Reddit. I'm a 27-year-old guy from Michigan, and I guess you could say my family situation has always been complicated. My dad, David, is probably one of the hardest working people I know. He owns a mid-sized logistics company, and he built it from scratch. Seriously, the man started with nothing and turned it into something big. But here's the thing. To get there, he's had to travel a lot. Like, he's gone more than he's home. Growing up, I always admired him. Even though he was on the road constantly, he somehow managed to make us feel like we were his top priority. He'd call every day, always asking about school or my hobbies, and when he was home, he gave us his full attention. No distractions, just quality time. He even roped me into fixing up old cars with him in the garage when I was a teenager. Those are some of my best memories with him. My sisters, Amelia, 30, and Rachel, 28, have also benefited a lot from Dad's success. Both of them work at the company now, and for years, Dad bragged about how proud he was of them. He genuinely believed they were following in his footsteps and helping build the legacy he'd worked so hard to create. But lately, I've started to see cracks in that perfect picture. Then there's my mom, Caroline. Look, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. She's always been a bit much. She's the type who has to control every situation, even when there's nothing to control. When I was younger, I thought her constant nagging at Dad was just how marriage worked. But as I got older, I realized it wasn't normal. She was never happy, no matter what Dad did. He'd come home from a long trip, exhausted, and she'd complain about something trivial, like how he forgot to pick up a specific brand of bread on his way back. As for Amelia and Rachel, they've always been really close with Mom. Like weirdly close. Don't get me wrong, there's nothing bad about being close with your mom, but it's almost like they've formed their own little clique. They're constantly going on girls' outings to fancy restaurants, shopping trips, and even weekend getaways. Last week, Dad and I were grabbing lunch while he was back in town. It was one of those rare moments where we got to talk without any distraction. He seemed off, though, quieter than usual. I asked if everything was okay, and after a bit of hesitation, he opened up. He told me he's been feeling lonely, like really lonely. He said he feels like Mom doesn't even care about him anymore. She barely talks to me unless it's to criticize something, he said. That hit me hard because even though I've seen it happen, hearing him say it out loud made it so much more real. He also mentioned that Mom spends all her time with Amelia and Rachel now. It's like I'm not part of the family when I'm home, he added. And then he dropped something that really stuck with me. He said he'd suggested that Mom come along on a few of his trips. I thought maybe we could have some time together, just us, he said, his voice trailing off. But of course, she turned him down. Every single time. She'd say she couldn't leave the girls, or that she already had plans with them. Plans to go to some overpriced spa, or a painting night, or whatever they're into these days. It was clear to me that Mom had her priorities, and Dad wasn't one of them. I could tell how much it hurt him. He's not the kind of guy who likes to complain. He just keeps pushing forward no matter what. But hearing him talk like that, I realized how much it was weighing on him. And honestly, it made me angry. How could Mom, the woman he's been married to for over 30 years, treat him like an afterthought? After lunch, I couldn't stop thinking about what he said. The more I thought about it, the more things started to click into place. It all felt off, like there was something deeper going on. I started paying more attention to their behavior. Whenever I visited the house, mostly when Dad is home, I'd notice how they'd huddle together, whispering and laughing, almost like they had some big secret. If Dad tried to join in or ask what they were talking about, they'd brush him off with a quick, oh, nothing. It felt deliberate, like they were keeping him out on purpose. And then there were the shopping bags. Every time I saw Amelia and Rachel, they were carrying bags from high-end stores. Mom, too. Shoes, handbags, jewelry, you name it, they had it. It didn't make sense to me. Sure, they work at the company, but their positions aren't exactly executive level. Where was all this money coming from? I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but my gut was telling me something wasn't right. I needed answers, but I didn't know how to get them. All I knew was that whatever was going on, it wasn't normal. And the more I thought about it, the more determined I became to figure it out. At the end of the day, Dad doesn't deserve any of this. He spent his whole life working to provide for us, and this is how he's being repaid? I felt like I owed it to him to get to the bottom of whatever was going on, even if it meant stepping on some toes. So, this all went down last weekend while Dad was away on another one of his work trips. I know it's nothing new, but since our talk the week before, I'd been thinking about him nonstop. Anyway, on Saturday morning, I decided to call Mom to check in. I figured maybe I could swing by and take her and my sisters out for lunch. It had been a while since we all sat down together, and I thought it might be nice. Plus, I was curious. Okay, fine, suspicious, about what they'd been up to. When Mom picked up the phone, she sounded weird, like almost caught off guard that I'd called. I told her my idea about lunch, and there was this long pause before she said, "Oh, we'd love to, but we already have plans." I asked what kind of plans, and she got all vague. "You know, just a little girls' day out," she said, her voice way too casual. In the background, I heard Rachel saying something about picking the perfect spot, and Amelia laughing. Now here's the thing. Girls' days aren't unusual for them. They've been doing this for years. But the way Mom answered, combined with how I've been feeling about all their recent behavior, made my radar go off. I didn't push it, though. I just told her to have fun and hung up. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. So I decided to swing by the house later that day, just to see if they were back. Maybe I'd misread the situation, and they really were just out shopping or whatever. By the time I got there, their cars were gone. I debated leaving, but curiosity, or maybe sheer frustration, got to me. So I did something I've never done before. I followed them. Now, before anyone calls me a creep, let me explain. I wasn't trying to spy on them for no reason. I just needed to know if what I'd been suspecting all this time was true. They weren't hard to track. I know Amelia's car. It's this bright red convertible she begged Dad to co-sign on when she got promoted at the company. Sure enough, I saw it parked outside this super exclusive country club on the other side of town. Let me just say this. We're not country club people. We're solidly middle class, even with Dad's success. Okay, maybe a little above that. The kind of place they were at? It's where rich people go to network over overpriced salads. We don't have any business there. I parked a little ways off and headed inside. I didn't want to seem obvious, so I hung back near the lobby until I spotted them. They were sitting on the patio, laughing and sipping on what I assume were fancy cocktails. But it wasn't just the three of them. There was a guy with them. And let me tell you, he looked young. I mean, at least 15 years younger than Mom. Like he came straight out of one of those cheesy dating shows. The kind where everyone's a little too tan and wears sunglasses indoors. He had on this obnoxiously bright blazer and a smug expression that just screamed, "I'm better than you." I couldn't hear what they were talking about, but it was obvious they were comfortable with him. Too comfortable. At one point, he leaned over to brush something off Mom's shoulder, then kissed her forehead. And Mom? She smiled like it was the most normal thing in the world. My stomach turned. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but it was hard not to. Amelia and Rachel were sitting there, laughing and joking with this guy like he was part of the family. It didn't take a genius to figure out what was going on. I must have shifted, or made a noise because suddenly Mom spotted me. For a second, she just froze, like a deer in headlights. Then, in the most dramatic move I've ever seen, she grabbed her purse, leaned over to whisper something to the guy, and practically bolted. I mean, she dragged him behind her so fast it was like they were being chased. Amelia and Rachel stayed behind, clearly left to deal with me. They looked annoyed, like I'd ruined their day. Rachel was the first to speak. "It's not what you think," she said, but her tone was more defensive than anything else. Amelia, ever the smooth talker, chimed in. "Jonathan makes Mom happy," she said. Like that explained everything. She even had the nerve to add, "Dad and Mom's marriage has been over for years. You know that, right?" I just stood there, stunned. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. When I asked how long this had been going on, Amelia shrugged. "A while," she said, like it was no big deal. Then they dropped the real bomb. Apparently, this guy, Jonathan, has been spoiling them, taking them out to fancy dinners, buying them gifts, paying for their spa days, you name it. And get this, they've been dipping into Dad's company money to keep up. Amelia tried to justify it by saying they didn't want to look bad compared to Jonathan, who's apparently some trust fund kid living off his parents' wealth. I didn't even know what to say. The whole thing was so far beyond what I expected. I just stood there, staring at them. Eventually, I just walked away. I didn't trust myself to stay calm if I stayed any longer. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I'd see Mom and that guy, Jonathan, laughing it up like they didn't have a care in the world. Then I'd hear Amelia and Rachel justifying it, acting like it was no big deal. My blood was boiling. I kept replaying the scene in my head, wondering how the hell we even got here. By the time morning rolled around, I was done waiting. I had to confront Mom. There was no way I could sit back and let this slide. Not after what I'd seen and what they'd admitted. So I drove to the house, determined to get some answers. When I got there, Mom was exactly where I expected her to be. On the couch in the living room, scrolling through her phone like she didn't have a single problem in the world. The sight of her just lounging there, completely oblivious to the chaos she'd caused, made my blood boil even more. I didn't bother with pleasantries. "We need to talk," I said as I walked in. She barely glanced up. "About what?" she asked, her tone dismissive. like I'd interrupted some important meeting instead of her Instagram scroll. I didn't ease into it. I saw you yesterday at the country club with Jonathan. That got her attention. She put her phone down and looked at me, her face unreadable. And, she said, like I'd just told her the weather forecast. And, I repeated, incredulous. That's all you have to say? I saw you with another man, Mom. Amelia and Rachel told me everything. About how you've been seeing him, about how they've been helping you cover it up, about the money. She didn't even try to deny it. She just sighed and said, "You don't understand. Your father and I haven't been happy for years. Our marriage has been over for a long time." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Then why are you still here? Why not tell him and end it? Her response floored me. Because it's easier this way, she said. Do you know how hard it would be to start over at my age? And Jonathan? He understands me. He makes me feel appreciated in ways your father never could. I couldn't wrap my head around her logic. So instead of being honest, you decided to cheat? To lie to him? She waved me off like I was being dramatic. Your father is fine. That's when I brought up the money. What about the company funds you've been taking? Amelia and Rachel told me about that too. How do you justify stealing from Dad to fund your little outings with Jonathan? Her demeanor changed. She sat up straighter and looked at me like I'd just insulted her. It's not stealing, she said, her voice sharp. Do you know how humiliating it would be if we looked cheap compared to Jonathan? He's been so generous, and we needed to keep up appearances. I was stunned. Keep up appearances? Mom, Dad works himself to the bone for this family, and you're using his money to impress some guy? Do you even hear yourself right now? She rolled her eyes. Oh, stop being so dramatic. David's fine. He'll survive. You're blowing this completely out of proportion. She didn't even hesitate. Your father made his choice years ago when he decided work was more important than his family. That was the moment I realized there was no reasoning with her. She'd convinced herself that she was the victim in all of this, that somehow Dad was the bad guy for working hard to provide for us. I stood there for a moment, trying to process everything. The woman sitting in front of me wasn't the mom I thought I knew. She was someone else entirely. Someone who didn't care about the damage she was causing as long as she got what she wanted. I can't believe you, I finally said. I can't believe you do this to him. To us. Do you even care about this family at all? She didn't answer. She just picked up her phone and went back to scrolling, like our conversation was over. That was my breaking point. I turned around and walked out without another word. I couldn't be in the same room with her any longer. As I drove home, I felt a mix of anger, sadness, and frustration. Part of me wanted to call Dad and tell him everything right then and there, but another part of me worried about how he'd take it. He's already dealing with so much, and this could be the thing that breaks him. At the same time, I can't just sit on this. He deserves to know the truth, no matter how much it hurts. But how do I even begin to tell him? How do I break the news that the woman he's spent his whole life loving and supporting has been betraying him behind his back? I don't know what to do, Reddit. If you've been in a situation like this, I'd really appreciate your advice. I feel like I'm stuck between a rock and a hard place, and I have no idea how to move forward. Update. 1. Hey Reddit. Thanks for all the advice on my last post. A lot of you gave me solid input, and after reading through the comments, I made up my mind. I had to tell Dad. There was no way I could keep something like this from him. He's been nothing but good to all of us, and he didn't deserve to be blindsided like this. I waited until he got back from his trip. He was supposed to be home late Sunday night, so I figured I'd give him a day to settle in before dropping the bomb. Monday evening, I asked if we could grab dinner, just the two of us. Dad didn't think anything of it. He's always up for spending time with me. We went to his favorite diner, a low-key spot we've been going to since I was a kid. The whole drive there, I was rehearsing what I was going to say in my head. I knew this wasn't going to be easy, but I wanted to be clear and honest without completely overwhelming him. When we sat down, Dad was in a good mood. He was talking about his trip, how the meetings went, and a new client they'd landed. He seemed proud, which made what I was about to do even harder. After we ordered, I started. Dad, there's something I need to tell you. It's about Mom. His face changed immediately. He didn't say anything, but I could tell I had his full attention. I took a deep breath and just laid it all out. The country club, Jonathan, the things Amelia and Rachel admitted, the stolen money, everything. I didn't sugarcoat it because I felt like he deserved to know the full truth. When I finished, Dad just sat there, staring at the table. For a moment, I thought he wasn't going to say anything at all. Then finally, he spoke. I always suspected something was off, he said quietly, his voice heavy. That threw me. What do you mean? I asked. He shook his head and let out a bitter laugh. Your mom's been distant for years. I thought maybe it was because of the travel, or that we'd just grown apart over time. But deep down, I think I knew it was more than that. Hearing him say that broke me. I could see how much this was hurting him, even if he was trying to hold it together. Then something shifted in his expression. The sadness was still there, but it was like a switch flipped, and anger started creeping in. Dad's not the type to get mad easily. He's always been calm and level-headed, even in the worst situation. But this was different. Thank you for telling me, he said, his voice steady but sharp. I need your help with something. I nodded immediately. Of course, whatever you need. He asked me to help him gather evidence, photos, emails, anything we could find. He wasn't going to confront Mom without being fully prepared. And when it came to the company, he wanted to make sure every dime that had been stolen was accounted for. The next week was a whirlwind. Dad didn't waste any time. He met with a lawyer the very next day to go over the prenup and discuss his options. Turns out, he'd thought ahead when they got married, and the prenup was airtight. Mom wasn't going to walk away with much, which was a small relief. Meanwhile, Dad started digging into the company finances. It didn't take long to find what Amelia and Rachel had been up to. They'd been submitting fake expense reports for months, charges for client meetings that were actually gifts for Jonathan, fancy dinners, and who knows what else. The evidence was all there in black and white. Once Dad had everything he needed, he made his move. First, he fired Amelia and Rachel. It wasn't dramatic. He just called them into his office and handed them termination letters. When they tried to argue, he shut them down. You've both betrayed this company and this family, he said. There's nothing more to discuss. Next, he froze their company accounts, which meant no more access to the credit cards they'd been using to fund their lifestyle. They were cut off completely. Finally, he filed for divorce. Mom was served the papers at home. She called Dad immediately, but he didn't pick up. He didn't even bother talking to her in person. When I asked him about it later, he just shrugged and said, "She's not worth my time." That line hit me hard, because it showed how far gone their relationship really was. I think part of me hoped there'd be some kind of resolution, but it was clear Dad was done. As for Mom, she didn't take it well. From what I heard, because I haven't talked to her directly since this all went down, she tried to play the victim, saying Dad was being cruel and heartless. But let's be real, she brought this on herself. Amelia and Rachel haven't reached out to me either, which is probably for the best. I don't know what I'd even say to them if they did. They made their choices, and now they're facing the consequences. It's been a few weeks since everything happened, and things are still messy, but I can tell Dad's starting to feel a sense of relief. He's focused on getting the divorce finalized and cleaning up the company. He even mentioned taking a break from work once everything's settled, which I think is a great idea. As for me, I'm just trying to support him as much as I can. He deserves better than what Mom and my sisters did to him, and I'm going to make sure he knows that not everyone in this family is against him. Anyway, that's where things stand right now. Thanks again for all the advice. Some of your comments really helped me find the courage to do what needed to be done. I'll keep you updated if anything new happens, but for now, I'm just glad Dad knows the truth. Theminar 2. Hey Reddit, I'm back with another update. It's been a crazy few weeks, and things have escalated in ways I didn't expect. Let me fill you in on what's happened since Dad took action against Mom and my sister. So, remember Jonathan, Mom's perfect new guy? Turns out his whole lifestyle was funded by his parents. He's one of those trust fund kids who's never had to work a day in his life. I had no idea before, but apparently his family comes from old money. Big houses, private jets, the whole 9 yards. Jonathan's been living the high life off their generosity for years, and Mom and my sisters were more than happy to hop on that gravy train. But here's the thing. Jonathan's family is super conservative, like the kind of people who pride themselves on their reputation and traditional values. So, when they found out he was throwing their money at some married woman and her 2 freeloading daughters, they absolutely lost it. I don't know all the details of how they found out, whether it was through Dad's legal proceedings or some other way, but they did. And when they did, they cut him off entirely. No more trust fund, no more allowance, no more cushy lifestyle. It happened fast. One day, Jonathan was taking Mom and my sisters to expensive restaurants and buying them gifts. The next day, he was broke. And when I say broke, I mean broke. His parents didn't just freeze his accounts. They also took back the fancy condo he was living in and repossessed his car, which of course they had paid for. He went from being the flashy, rich guy to just another dude with designer clothes he couldn't afford. Naturally, Mom and my sisters panicked. They'd hitched their wagon to Jonathan, thinking he was their ticket to an easy, glamorous life. When that fell apart, they had no backup plan. And let's not forget that Dad had already cut off all financial ties with them after firing Amelia and Rachel from the company. Mom tried to play the victim. She called Dad to demand the house, saying she needed it to keep her dignity during the divorce. But Dad's prenup was rock solid, and she had no legal claim to it. She might as well have been asking for the moon. When she realized she wasn't getting the house, she tried to stall the divorce proceedings, claiming she needed more time to figure things out. Dad wasn't having it. His lawyer pushed through everything as quickly as possible, and before Mom knew it, the divorce was finalized. She walked away with barely anything, just her car and a small amount of alimony, which wasn't even enough to cover the life she'd been living. With Jonathan out of the picture and Dad refusing to support them anymore, Mom, Amelia, and Rachel were left with no choice but to downsize. Big time. They moved into this tiny two-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of town. It's a far cry from the big house they were used, and from what I've heard, they're not handling it well. Amelia and Rachel have been trying to find new jobs, but it's not going great. Word about what they did at the company got around, and now their reputations are shot. No one wants to hire someone with a track record of stealing from their own family business. As for Mom, she's doing what she does best, blaming everyone but herself. From what I've heard through mutual friends, she's been telling anyone who will listen that Dad is punishing her and that Jonathan betrayed her. The level of delusion is honestly astounding. The funniest part? Jonathan apparently tried to crawl back to Mom after his parents cut him off. He showed up at her apartment one day, begging for a place to stay. But without his money and status, he wasn't exactly the cat she thought he was. She turned him away, which is probably the only smart decision she's made in this whole mess. I've been spending more time with Dad lately, helping out at the company and just hanging out. It's been nice, actually, like we're getting back to the kind of relationship we had when I was younger. I haven't spoken to Mom, Amelia, or Rachel since everything went down. I don't even know what I'd say if I did. Part of me feels like I should try to reach out, but another part of me thinks they don't deserve it. They made their choices, and now they have to live with the consequences. What do you guys think? Am I wrong for cutting them off completely? Should I try to rebuild some kind of relationship with them? Or is it better to just let it go? I'm torn because as angry as I am, they're still my family. Anyway, that's where things are right now. Jonathan's gone, Mom and my sisters are struggling, and Dad's finally getting the peace he deserves. I don't know what's going to happen next, but I'll keep you all updated if anything changes. Thanks for reading, and as always, I appreciate your advice. Update 3. Hey Reddit, it's been a while. I wasn't planning to come back and update because I thought this whole mess was behind me. But, well, life has a way of dragging you back when you least expect it. Not too long ago, Mom, Amelia, and Rachel reached out to me. Yeah, you read that right. After everything they did, they had the audacity to ask for my help. At first, I didn't even want to hear them out. I figured it'd be something ridiculous, and it was. Turns out Rachel is getting married. And shocker, they're struggling to afford the wedding. They wanted me to talk to Dad and convince him to do the right thing and chip in for her big day. I'll be honest with you, I laughed out loud when I heard that. The sheer nerve of them to even ask, after everything they put Dad through, was mind-blowing. It's like they completely forgot about the part where they betrayed him. When I told them there was no way in hell I was asking Dad for money, they tried to guilt-trip me. Rachel started crying, saying this was supposed to be the happiest time of her life, and she couldn't believe I was letting family drama ruin it. Amelia chimed in, saying I was being petty and that Dad wouldn't want us to suffer like this. Suffer? Seriously? They're the ones who did this to themselves. For some context, if some of you have missed my updates, things haven't been going well for them since everything came out. Jonathan's fall from grace left them scrambling to adjust to a life without luxury. Mom's still in that tiny apartment with Amelia and Rachel, and from what I've heard through the grapevine, they're barely scraping by. Amelia's been jumping from one temp job to another because no one wants to hire someone with a reputation for stealing from their own family business. Rachel hasn't even found a new job yet. Meanwhile, Dad completely wiped his hands of them. He didn't just cut them off financially, he went all in and removed them from his will too. He told me flat out, they've made it clear where their loyalties lie. I'm not leaving anything to people who betrayed me. Instead, Dad restructured everything so the company and his personal assets will come to me when the time comes. That's a big deal because, honestly, I never saw myself running the company. I've always wanted to carve my own path, be independent. But now, things have changed. Dad's been getting back to his usual self, which means traveling a lot for work again. He loves being on the road, meeting clients, and expanding the business. It's what he's passionate about, and I think it's his way of moving forward from all the chaos. But with him gone so often, the responsibility of running things day to day has fallen on me. At first, I wasn't sure if I was ready for it, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized I had to step up. Dad's done so much for this family, and now it's my turn to support him. So, I've been diving headfirst into the business. It's been a learning curve for sure, but I'm getting the hang of it. I'm still figuring out my own style of leadership, but it's starting to feel like something I can actually do. As for Mom, Amelia, and Rachel, I've made it clear that I'm done with them. That didn't go over well. Mom called me cruel and said I was turning my back on family. Amelia accused me of being brainwashed by Dad, and Rachel just cried about how unfair it all was. But I stood my ground. At the end of the day, family isn't about DNA. It's about loyalty, respect, and trust. And they destroyed all of that when they chose greed and lies over doing the right thing. Do I feel bad for them? Sometimes, yeah. It's hard to see people you grew up with fall so far. But then I remember how much pain they caused Dad, and any sympathy I have for them disappears. So yeah, That's how things worked out. Mom, Amelia, and Rachel are still struggling. Rachel's wedding is probably going to be as low budget as they come, and Dad and I are moving forward with our lives. I don't know if they'll ever really understand the damage they caused or take responsibility for their action. But honestly, that's not my problem anymore. I'm focused on building a better future for myself and supporting the one person in my family who's always had my back. Thanks for sticking with me through all of this, Reddit. It's been a wild ride, but I think I'm finally at a place where I can close this chapter for good.